So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And today we will be talking about observability. We have four panel members with us. Sanjay, actually three panel members with us. Sanjay, Jonna, and Usheng. So Janki Ram had to drop off because of some family emergency. So we are moving with panel discussion with three members only. Uh, okay, so I will switch to. So hello everyone again. We will start with introductions. So Jonna, you want to start with it?
Sure, happy to do so. Thanks for having me on. Jonah Cowell, CTO here at Logs.io. Spent a lot of time in the observability market as a user, an analyst at Gartner, and then working at a couple vendors. So great to see you all and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Usheng, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Wusheng from the trade. I'm working on the source mesh observability, and right now I'm the Apache Software Foundation board director and
Wusheng's internet's not so good. Hopefully he'll be back.
Okay, he is back, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's not stable.
Okay. Sanjay, you want to go next?
Yeah, Sanjay Nagaraj here, co-founder, CTO Traceable. Been building next generation application security using a lot of the observability techniques that way. And great to be here to talking to all of you guys.
Cool. So let's just jump into the discussion part itself because we have a lot of interesting questions to discuss and we have very less amount of time. So first, I would like to ask you folks that what do you think about present situation of observability and how do you differentiate with classic APM or monitoring part of it? We can start. We can maintain the same round robin thing with Jonna.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot to unpack in this one, so I'll try to be somewhat brief. I mean, observability is a broader topic, and it's something that APM tools have been trying to do for quite some time. To me, the concept of observability is figuring out how you gain business insight into the application and not just technical insight. So the data used from observability tools can be used by a product manager, line of business, and obviously by engineers, but not just for technical troubleshooting and other use cases, but also getting deeper into understanding how the business is going, what your users are doing. And it's something that APM tools have been trying to do for quite some time. The difference is APM tools do it post-development, typically with some type of auto instrumentation, typically done by IT teams that don't have access to build it in the software. But that's changing a lot. With observability, the developers are actually implementing the instrumentation. They're defining exactly what needs to be extracted. And so there's definitely differences in the approach, but observability tools are also doing more and more APM functionality. Something that Wusheng and I have talked a lot about is what he's been doing in Skywalking to make it more APM-like, adding metrics in and not just tracing, which is another key piece that we've seen evolving in the industry. So that's my kind of initial view on it.
Interesting. What do you think around it, Usheng?
Yeah, for me, it's about APM is more about technology. It's more about how to observe an application. But for observability, it's more like a feeling from the human. Like you can understand. Because in the old day, like 10 years ago, there is no such complex distributed system. It's just one or two process and a very huge machine and to run the codes. And right now we have hundreds of service, thousands of instances to support something. So you have to understand how these things works, and this understandable actually we call that observability to make people think it's different.
That's a nice view to look at it. So Sanjay, how
Yeah,
do you look at the whole situation?
now I think the beauty of going last is that you can just say, "Yeah, I agree to what they're saying." Right? So, which obviously I do agree with this. The way, at least, let me add to what Jonah and Wusheng have been talking about, which is I look at observability as an evolution, similar to the microservices and distributed services that Wusheng is talking about. It's an evolution in terms of how developers, DevOps, and the overall ecosystem itself tries to understand an application and everything else. So if APM was a lot more about when something went wrong, you would get to know, right? Not necessarily the how or what went wrong or what the remediation technique should be, right? Observability takes that overall context to enable some of that remediation to happen as to what actually went wrong, what was the impact overall for all the different services that were interacting, right? That's the beauty of observability. That way is at least the way I look at it.
Yeah, so I mean, for you feel that distributed tracing is like really key to observability. It's definitely one of the pillars, but
Correct.
APM tools ignored logging, which is a really awesome signal for debugging. And so I think that's part of the challenge too, is how do you bring together metrics, logging, and tracing? And APM brought together 2 out of the 3 signals.
Yes.
And then but it also brought another signal in, which we don't think about a lot, which is profiling. Like when you think about a running system, profiling and understanding the runtime is a big part of what APM tools do. It's not something that's really in scope and observability, but we're starting to talk about that now more as yet another signal that's really important when you're troubleshooting a distributed system that's running, right?
Absolutely. And I think one other thing that was like when you look at many of the tools that Jonah, Wusheng, we've all been part of building that way over the years, they were all treated a little bit separately, right? That holistic nature of it did not come together. People looked at infrastructure as an independent thing, logs as an independent thing, metrics that was coming in as an independent thing, right? And actually the events itself that the infrastructures generate, they were looking at it differently as well, right? Where are these services running and how they're running, how often they're getting deployed, how is it tied to your CI/CD system, as in terms of the builds itself that are getting deploying many of these services. They were all treated very independently, right? And bringing all of these things together, as Jonah is saying, is what is making it exciting now. There's no one single, one independent view that way. You're taking a more of a holistic view.
Yes.
Yeah, I think for all of the projects, all of the vendors who are focusing on resolving the observability or real runtime product environment monitoring, the things you need to bonding all of these contexts together, such as like we said, there was a logging metric and the tracing all around, but we have events detection, we have profiling, we have some connection link. We need to build the connection between all of these concepts that people could have a quick view and quick identify the root cause.
So in aggregate, I see like observability adding a lot of value in case of managing modern distributed systems, right? So what are different interesting use cases you folks have you folks have observed when you are working with your customers or when you are working at your organization itself? So if you want to talk about that a bit, Jonna, we can start with you.
All right, I'm always starting. So
We will reverse it at one point.
what's that?
We will reverse the order at one point.
Good,
Don't
then I
worry
can
about
just
it.
say that I agree with everything that Sanjay and Uche said. So for me, I find it really interesting how the conversation has evolved. Like when I used to deal with APM tools 5 to 10 years ago, it was always like, we have this thing in production, it's broken, we don't know what's going on, help us install something so that we can observe it and fix it. And now the conversation that I have all the time with customers is, we're about to launch a new game. We know we need observability. We have to code it in. We've got 6 weeks to make it happen before we're supposed to launch it on the App Store. How do we make this happen, and how do we get the right signals in? So I think now engineers know that if they don't build observability into the tool, into the product that they're launching, they're going to be blind. They're not going to be able to understand what's happening. And this is what we see really regularly, is that now people think about this before. Before, we used to deploy it and it would break, and then we would say, how do we figure this out? And so I think the conversation is now switched, and software developers think about it, not operations people. It's both together. And obviously with DevOps and not having the silo between the teams, that's changed things pretty considerably. So, I think there's a lot of great use cases. I didn't talk about those. Of course, it's about troubleshooting, but it's also just about understanding the business. If you are running a sale, for example, you need to be able to understand what the experience is like, what the performance is like, what types of products are converting better. So there's a lot of different analytics that happen across the data. And then obviously there's lots of security use cases, but I'll leave those to Sanjay.
Yes, completely. Means when you're talking like 10 years back, things were mostly like there was not that much digitalization at this point, right? So now when you look at it, most of the businesses have moved to digitalization. So mostly like priorities also changed. So you have to know your system well for it to work well in a business, right? Sure. So what do you think, Usheng, around the whole use cases thing? And what are some
Yeah.
of the things you have observed?
I want to hijack the security.
I thought you were going to talk about service mesh.
Yeah, as I told you, I'm just going to agree with everything that they say. That's it.
Yeah. Before the service mesh, I just want to highlight about the Skywalking's new use case, because right now I have some consulting to several vendors. They build product based on Skywalking, but basically they're have nothing related to monitoring or observability. They are focusing on the security and the security review, the data leak, because actually you are providing a system with observability. You actually provide a system to replay all of the data flow. So they are trying to find out where the data goes around. That's one typical case happening in these several months. And the other one is chaos testing. So today people are introducing chaos engineer or chaos framework to do chaos engineering to the whole distributed system. And in that case, they want to see more specific reaction from the system. It's sometimes because you have a multiple layer to fail back. So basically, no matter what you did, the system seems like this works still. But you want to see whether every layer of your failback system really works. So when that time, you need a specific event detector to match specific metrics, specific trace to identify what the system really reacts. That is another thing about the key difference between observability and monitoring. Monitoring mostly cares about systems still functional.
Yeah, I think as I was saying, I just agree with Wusheng, and as Jonah was talking about, the use cases are expanding on a regular basis, right? Because of one, the DevOps as a function, knowing very well that if they don't put the right metrics in, that means that they won't be able to troubleshoot it later, or they won't have the insights that they need later when the business is demanding those details that way, right? But I think the security use case is obviously something that I have been really focused on over the last couple of years. Just to extend to what Wusheng is saying, the security use case is not just that we are not seeing just about purely the data flow. That's actually obviously a very important piece of it. But from a security perspective, the developers, as in DevOps, as much as the data that's being put into the application, there is still a lot of cases that are being missed from an understanding of a security posture itself. Where are my APIs deployed? How are they? What type of data is flowing in, as Wusheng is saying? But also, is this data leaving the system? Is this data going to third-party services? And what types of roles are accessing those particular APIs itself? And who are the users typically accessing those, right? A lot of that context is what is missing from a security perspective. So a lot of our customers now are not just trying to understand these APIs, because from a performance perspective, or even from a business perspective, understanding the context of an API is very different when it comes to security. Security is a lot about how are these APIs getting used, who are they using it, and of course the data aspect of it, right? From a performance perspective, it's a lot about the metrics aspect of it, or what parts of the code is getting executed. In security, a lot of these things are need to be holistically considered, but at the same time, security and operations teams don't really have that context either around the code, right? That means that certain things have to be presented in such a way that they gain that context, because code is moving so rapidly for them that they are actually in some cases the last ones to be informed, right? That's where we are seeing a lot of those use cases come through on our end.
So I've got a question for you on that piece, just because I'm curious. With tracing specifically, because developers have to be so closely consulted with when you're implementing it, do you see the division between security and DevOps changing? Because I sort of think it's happening, but not that fast. I think it's going to take a long time, but maybe you're seeing something different.
No, actually, we are. So first of all, we all wish that everything can be as fast as possible, and the reality is that some of these things take just time, right? But one thing that is very, very clear based on the conversations that we are having is developers actually want to enable security to have all the insights. Like we were talking about, similarly, when the business asks if there is an issue that happens, or if the business wants to know why some new deployment failed, or what the business metrics were associated with the new campaign or new application that went out, or whatever it is. Similarly, they want to have those answers for security as well. And typically, if you look at it, security has been where if there are vulnerabilities that were found, or if there were attacks that happened, the developers don't want to be at that point going, I have no idea, I got to create logs for these, right? So they are as much interested in actually solving these use cases for security as much as from a performance perspective. What they're tired of is, don't give me a list of vulnerabilities to go and solve. And we have all seen this, where they just go and disable certain parts of the as part of the scanning itself to add exclusions and things like that, right? So they're tired of getting tons of it. But what they are very interested in, if security finds something, what is the line of code that's having the problem, so that they can actually go prioritize and fix it. Prioritization has been the key for us.
So, Sanjay, you're basically saying that people are expecting more actionable insights than just.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's nice. So then that brings us to, like, having how we can add more context into observability, or how we can extend the definition of observability in a way that it addresses various domains, right? Or it addresses various personas. Like right now we have maybe DevOps, or as you are talking about, security as well. So how do you see this definition, the classical definition, getting expanded into this particular specific domains? So we can reverse the round now, if we want to.
Actually, I would love to get to know this from Wushang as well, because Wushang has been
Okay.
thinking about so the service meshes itself have been changing not the way we deploy applications, manage applications, and everything else, but they're also bringing about a change in terms of how we observe applications, obviously, right? So what are you seeing as an expansion there, Wushang, on your end in terms of customers and how they're thinking about it?
I think that basically the security and the observability is the very emotion in the customer to move forward to the service mesh, and some of them are very aggressive about moving forward, even more than we expected. So the basically is the agent, the logical agent is changing from inside process to out of process, because in several years ago, I think that's the first time I met. We met at Seattle, and I went to Sysdig, and they are putting the agent on the operation system level, and they're doing the things like today's service mesh, but service mesh process these things in a more general available way and more popular way in the Kubernetes. So today we can see, once we have agent in different place, we can detect different events. But also we also should be very clear about the reality is service mesh is not replacing the language agent, because there are far more things the mesh cannot do. The most interesting thing about the mesh is you don't need to pay any actual work on your codes, and they can give you, like we also say, like 70% or 18% of the we are going to provide that basic kind of
yes. So you're saying that there's no overhead when you do it on the mesh, because you can take it out of process, but also you can't propagate context either, right? So there's challenges with doing that end-to-end view with the mesh.
Correct. Correct. I think
also you have the profiling, such as of the log integration, and because you need log injection about the trace context. Many things you can demonstrate about service mesh cannot do, but this is the key point, that you have 70% of the fusion, you are out of box, no need to change the code anymore.
Correct. I think the key aspect there is if you look at it, again, observability has multiple facets to it that way, right? And if you look at it at a technical level, it's about the visibility and the discovery of your overall environment that way, right? But when you look at it at the application level, as you're saying, that's where there is that richer context that the application enables you to get, right? Because it's if you look at it, the context has to come from the infrastructure pieces in a way, and then there is the application pieces, and then the code itself that is getting executed. But also you're looking at the users who are actually accessing that code, right? And wishing the other part that you are making, which is the data that's flowing outside now, because again, from going back to security, which I've been breathing now for the last many years now that way, is the difficulty is there is no longer a single perimeter that way, right? that you can say, oh, I'm protecting this and done. Right? With services coming online in some cases, Amazon deploys code every 7 seconds, I guess, and so there are many of our customers who do it, if not on a daily basis, if not on an hourly basis, definitely on a daily basis, code gets deployed. So how do you that means that you need this full end-to-end context, right? Which is what enables some of those things. But now, not making it purely about security that way, but the aspect around that holistic context, I think, is what is very beneficial, right? John, how do you think about some of these things that way?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that that the use cases and the ways that we can take tracing data is always expanding, and there's more persona that can use it. It is very interesting, and I'm particularly interested in what other kinds of signals we can incorporate and correlate, because I think that also makes it a lot more interesting. We've talked about these 3 signals as being the pillars for quite some time, but I think that's going to change. And in the next few years, you're going to actually see more and more signals being incorporated into observability, because you need it if you're going to do more sophisticated threat analytics. You need it if you're going to do user behavior profiling. There's so many different security use cases for trace data that I think we have to incorporate more signals into. And that goes across the board. Like, if I want to start understanding the health of the internet, the health of my cloud providers, there's so many different things we can correlate with observability that are going to just make it a lot more obvious as to what's happening and understanding the broader root cause for problems that we're diagnosing. So I think we're actually just scratching the surface, and it's going to get a lot more interesting in the next few years.
So basically, means if I want to summarize it, what you are saying is that currently we have it on DevOps side. Like, mostly we are looking at DevOps personas, but eventually we will be also looking at business metrics, business decisions driven around observability itself.
Yeah, we already see that like daily, regularly with customers now, where it used to be rare. Like back when Sanjay and I worked together, it was like 5% of the customers would do it. Now it's like half of our customers are doing that. And as you get more mature and folks start to do this regularly, I think that just continues to grow. It becomes pretty normal now.
Before we move ahead, we have one question from audience. So question is, how is observability different from analytics, or are both same, or how do you folks differentiate it?
Who's starting?
I can take that to begin with. Analytics is mostly after the fact, or you are looking for that needle in the haystack, right? That's what I consider analytics to be. Observability is, of course, uses analytics in the background in many ways, but it is about enabling users to get to the RCA much sooner without having to analyze. So, but then once they get to the RCA, that's when the analytics kicks in for further understanding of the impact. If you look at it that way. Jonah, I don't know if you want to add that or anything.
Yeah, I'll give you my take on it. So observability is more about the actual raw data of how you observe a system and other associated systems. And that observability data goes into another system. Sometimes people call that a back end. It could be a service. It could be whatever it is that you decide to store that data. And then the value of that data is created by performing analytics on top of the data. And that could be done in an automated way with machine learning technologies, streaming analytics. It could be done manually after the fact by an analyst or an ops person or a developer that's investigating things. And so the analytics are where the value is. Observability is the raw materials, and the raw materials are becoming easier to obtain. And the value is in the analytics of the raw materials, which is the whole purpose of a project like Open Telemetry. It's how do I make observability ubiquitous and the data standardized? And then the value is in these systems that take that data and turn it into insights that customers care about or users care about in the case of open source too. So that's my take on that question.
So from my side, that analyst take is a part of you want to get a final vision of the observability. That have to be done. No matter what technology you want to do, so it's still needed. And observability, like we want to that as a cool name. So basically you can say that is a final results. And we know that there is some kind of marketing perspective about this term, and still we are trying to get a very accurate definition about this word. So I would suggest not focus on the word or the explanation. we are not setting up a wiki for all of these things.
Cool. So next thing, like as we are talking about observability, but even as Wusheng said, those are just words, right? So everything is driven by data, and the most important thing is how you collect data. So there's open telemetry now to standardize the data format, so everything can work well with everything. So means everything that does observability, right? So how do you folks see vendor neutral data collection going forward, or what are the different innovations which can happen in the data collection part of it itself? Who wants to go first? Now we are at raise the hand situation.
So I will take, because I'm the first time to take the first one. So Telemetry is, no matter what we call him, so standard or not, that's basically a tech stack only. So you have a way to collect data, to transform them in specific formats. That's all. Not take that too seriously about what standards means, because if we are looking at all of the history, actually all of the APM vendors, they have over 20 years history, and their format is existing for a very long time. So don't try to get such as new design and not approved things to replace all of the existing and widely used real things. That's not reality. That's not going to happen. And at the same time, if you want to some data to easier understand, you can take a look and the reference from them, and you can see what we are doing in Skywalking. We are integrated with all of these formats. So logically, they are not that different. So standard or not, actually is not that important. So let's say we put a format of the tracing and the Zipkin format and the Open Telemetry format, they're different. But so what? There's no logical difference between them. But if you are taking a look at Skywalking's trace format, APM vendors trace format, between the Zipkin and the Open Telemetry, you will see there's much different there, because they are targeting and designing for different things. So that's my point. You cannot unify all of that. It's different vendors, different tools are designed for resolving different issues. You are choosing the tool, you are choosing the vendor, the product to resolving your issue. Let's focus on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I
have a different take on it, but Jonah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different opinion on it too, because I feel like
this is getting interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, so trace data has been around for a long time, and there hasn't been any attempt at normalizing that protocol, really. There has been, but not really in the broad way that Open Telemetry is trying to do it. But we did mention there are three main signals we care about today. And so I think it's more about how we can do cool things across the different data sources. So because OpenTelemetry supports metrics today, and hopefully that by next year we'll support logs too, we can do cool things like take the trace data in, process it, and turn it into metrics, or do interesting ways of building sampling in the collector, for example. So like our team here, we've actually contributed some interesting code that creates the metrics inside OpenTelemetry, and then you can send them to any backend you want. You want it in Prometheus, okay. You want it in, whatever type of backend, InfluxDB, cool, you can send it there. And it makes it agnostic to where it helps users a lot because they can change the backend out easily. So if I'm using vendor A and I want to test vendor B, it's just a config change. I don't have to redo my instrumentation. I don't have to change agents. I don't have to do a lot of work. So it helps users a lot because we all know everyone's going to change tools every 3 years. That's the average. And so why not make it easier where I don't have to rip out all this stuff and I can just point it to a different endpoint, use new analytics, and get new value out of the same data that I'm already collecting, which to me is really exciting. And I think for users, it's going to save a lot of time. And then the second piece is, and Sanjay can attest to this one, building agents and supporting all these frameworks and technologies is incredibly time consuming when you're doing auto instrumentation. And so having a community building one set of technologies for Java, for Python, for PHP makes a lot of sense. I mean, why do we need to all do the same thing over and over again to make the agent work? It should just be a community where we're doing it once. So those are the things that I like about the standard, and not standard, the project. I hate to call it a standard because there's lots of standards. It's just another way of doing things.
It's a relative term.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Jonah. So if you look at the evolution of APM agents, which is kind of the data collection aspects of it that way, I think OpenTelemetry is something that has come a long way. We had open tracing, open census, and now OpenTelemetry that way. But the beauty of OpenTelemetry is that it is geared towards that broader observability. And as Jonah, you and Wusheng know, like we have bet big on OpenTelemetry. Everything that we have built has been OpenTelemetry compatible. Of course, we do support open tracing and census and everything else, but the goal has been that how can we enable our customers to not have a vendor lock-in that way, right? Even if it's not us, it doesn't matter. But the idea is that hopefully we will continue to do well and we'll continue to succeed over the next many years. But for whatever reason, if we don't want our customers to be left in like, okay, now they got to go replace all the agents. Agent replacement is one of the hardest challenges that the customers can have, right? So for us, that was one of the biggest reasons why we went and said the from a platform as in a protocol perspective, it has to be compliant to something that is, I like to call it a standard. I'll be honest, because again, people when they say standards, typically people get into you know what, these are there is a bunch of people who are getting together and writing some documents and people expect that to be followed and they take their own sweet time, get all that stuff. But the reason why in some cases standards help is otherwise people tend to get into, like today I can go to a vendor and say, are you OpenTelemetry compliant, right? If I'm the buyer, either they say yes or no, right? If they say no, you have a choice to make them, whether you want to be with something that's very specific to the offering itself, or tomorrow I could move to something else, right? So that enables a lot of from a customer use cases perspective, it enables us Jonah, Wusheng, and us to actually focus on solving their business use cases versus focusing on how do you collect data from various places, right? And that's where, meaning we put out whatever Java, Golang, and soon Python and everything as an open
So
source.
the downside is that these projects, and Wusheng will probably talk about this, have a tendency to change and make breaking changes pretty regularly, which is one of the reasons why we haven't actually ported the open telemetry collector back into Jaeger, because we're afraid of all the breaking changes that are going to cause maintenance headaches.
I agree.
And so it's like, how much do we want to just deal with the fact that in open telemetry, they want to change an API, and then we have to make changes in Jaeger to match it, and it just becomes a pain. And Wusheng, you've probably been burned by this with other standards, right? It might have been worked on in this industry.
I used to got disaster from the open tracing, and so when the open telemetry came to the world, and I'm very careful about all of the integration. So right now I'm just observing, and we are going to integrate all of the formats. They are used to exist, like the Zipkin format, like the open sensors, or like the Prometheus. And so Telemetry could transfer the format into these. Actually, I call that industrial open source level real standards that they are really using the end users. So we are going to integrate with them. And for the Telemetry native formats, we are still waiting. No matter what they are saying about the 1.0. I'm not supported by that. Yeah, I'm not
supporting OTLP yet.
Yeah, for the tracing, for the metric, even for the logging, and we are waiting. We are even willing to spend time to integrate with logs like Firebase provide or Influence Ticket provide, but we are not going to adopt that very quickly.
Wusheng, you're observing. That's what you're telling, right?
Yes. Yeah, we are observing. We are observing the real case, because those is same group of people use to break API.
And I think it is actually what you're making is a very valid point, but that goes to more and more folks getting involved in this over a period of time to make, like I see Jonah, for example, being active, and we are very active as well, where we are pointing these breaking changes as well. Guys, don't do this because this is going to break, right? That's how I think it's going to get better, because typically if there is only one or two people involved, that's when, you know what, they don't care, everything just goes, right? But if there are multiple people involved and making sure that the reviews are happening the right way, my hope at least is that again, we've all been burnt in the past, so that's where Wusheng, I think you're right about it.
But they're still making breaking changes. Like it just one happened last week, and I'm like, oh, here we go again.
Yep.
Welcome repeating the history.
We'll see. Let's hope that it gets better. That's all we can.
Okay, so after we are anyways running short on time, so I will jump to interesting question for many of the viewers, and maybe many people who will watch it afterwards. So if some company or some organization is trying to adapt observability in the use, like how they have some use cases around, they are trying to adapt observability for that. So what will be some of the guidelines for them from you folks, as you have spent a lot of time in the whole stuff? So what will be some of the guidelines or notes for them from your end?
Let me take that to begin with. On mine, I think it's about data. Make sure that your developers from day one are involved in instrumenting the applications in some ways, to put the right data pieces which has the right business context associated with it. I think that would be the key. Of course, I will let Jonah and Wusheng add all these things.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wusheng, you first.
Okay. So I think the first thing is about evaluating your resources, whether you have developer team or operation team on the board. So, and because we are also say there is a tracing, logging, and metrics. Actually, you don't always need all of them at day one. You need observability from the very beginning. Sometimes metric logging collection, they are much, much easier to 100% sampling for trace data. So try reasonable. Don't try to follow the landscape.
Yeah, for sure. Completely agree. Logging and metrics are easier to start with, and we see that in our customer base. I don't think we have many that start with tracing, but yeah, it's good to take baby steps, and obviously there's a maturity scale. So depending on where you are, what your needs are, and your architecture too, there are certain things that are going to be more beneficial to you in observing your systems. But it all starts back to what Sanjay said. It all starts with really being able to get engineers involved to put the right data into place for whatever signal you decide to implement. So that's definitely important. So
I guess Wu Sheng. Okay, he's back.
he's
So,
back.
so like, thanks for all those insights. I think it will be really helpful for all the folks who are just getting started with observability or want to get started with it. So one more question is there from audience. I will just read it out. When the Kubernetes itself is complex, additional integrations like Grafana, etc., may bring in additional points of failures to it. So how enterprise should look at it?
So I'm happy to take that one just because I do a lot of Grafana work, unfortunately.
Okay.
No, it's a good open source project for sure. But yeah, the stack is incredibly complex, especially as you start to cobble together open source tools. I mean, you can't find one tool that does everything. You end up implementing a lot of different tools to deal with the different data sets in open source. You can obviously go to a vendor and pay them and they can give you a platform that does these things, but most people use open source today. And that means they're going to use a whole bunch of different tools, different databases, different technologies to make it work. There's a lot of good options out there, but if you do want to do it yourself, it's really complicated. And that's just the nature of it. That's why companies like my company exists. That's why, there's lots of other great companies out there building these solutions to make it easier. I don't know that they introduce any points of failure, but when your system is overloaded or it's under attack and your observability system doesn't work, it's not very helpful. So if anything, I think dealing with scalability and making sure that your observability system can handle these types of events is a big concern. Because if you're blind and you're under attack, or you're blind and your system is down, then it's really not very helpful to get your business back up and running. So
I agree.
Yeah, I want to agree that Kubernetes is very complex. So there is no easy way to make things simple, because let's blame Google to design that since that's complex. So that's not a tool or tech stack could resolve. And one way you can, like, starting at day one to monitor piece by piece and set up the whole stack even in several months or years. And that's the only way if you want to work on open source, because for the community perspective, you are on your own, because they are trying to attract in the developer, the collaborator. They are not providing service. So service is the thing you are chasing for the vendor state. That's different angle, and you have to live with that. If you choose open source, that's not free. That's just software free. You still need to spend money, spend time on it.
Yeah.
So it's either cash or human resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and again, it's about one good thing about open source that way is you get to choose it, you get to understand it, but don't just grab something just because it is the next hot thing or somebody's talking about it and start to use it, right? So it's the same thing with all the observability tools that way as well. Is as Jonah said, like there are companies. That is the reason why companies exist for some of those things. But at the same time, I think Wushen can talk about it, which is whatever the Skywalker as a project that they have, and we have Hypertrace as a project, is because there are some customers who are serious about it, who want to build it themselves, who want to continue to contribute and use it, right? And so there are both sides of the companies. People who are happy just using a SaaS product which exists and they're just using it. But there are other companies who are taking this very seriously because they want to build a long-term business on it. And that's where projects like Skywalker and Hypertrace exist for those types of customers. So pick and choose, but don't just choose just because something is hot or just exists out there. Right? You should know.
Cool. So we will just end it with your final thoughts on and some key takeaways. So maybe one-liner for again what the presenters and what the future looks like, and that way we can end the session itself. Jonah, we can start from now.
I figured you were going to start with me, so I was just unmuting my mic.
Okay. I saw that. That's why I started with you.
So I'm really excited about where observability is going in the future of the industry. I think it's really exciting. Seeing more and more signals and giving people the better abilities to understand what's happening in their systems, I think, is going to just continue growing with additional signals and new ways of doing analytics. I think there's a lot of interesting technology happening on the back end side, a lot of new databases and data stores that I think will enable better scale and lower cost, which is a big challenge when you're dealing with the volumes of data. I love the quote that says Netflix is a logging company that streams movies. Just because of the volume of log data they generate. And I can tell you it's the same for us. We would be one of our top 20 customers. There's no question about it with the amount of data that we generate on our own systems.
Yeah.
And this is a growing problem. So I think cost and efficiency are big key takeaways of where the industry needs to go to make this actually feasible. It's a big data problem, and I'm excited to be part of solving it. So thanks for having me on.
So if I were to just follow what Jonah was talking about, the challenge is in correlating some of these events across multiple clouds, different tech stacks, Kubernetes service meshes, cloud native services, right? And from what customers are asking for is a unified view across these environments. To enable them to get not just the performance, to solve their performance use cases, security use cases, and overall their business use cases. That's where we are headed.
We conclude with you, Usha.
Yeah. So basically, and we share a lot of use cases, a lot of concepts. And I want to all of the people who watching this, don't be freaking away. And this is the thing you are going to face one day or another. So you are going to try it first. You are going to try to observe your system, no matter what tool or what vendors you are going to choose. That's not that matter at day one. And you will figure out what kind of observability, what kind of tools you are going to look at, because you need to get touch and get first feeling about what do you need, what you lack when you face the first time fail down with a highly distributed system. And if your current tools is not working anymore, you know what you are looking for.
Exactly. Cool. So again, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sanjay, Jonna, Wusheng for joining us. And it was really interesting discussion. We had a lot of interesting perspectives around many things. So I will just okay. And thanks everyone for joining in who is watching it live or who will be watching it afterwards as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit us on Twitter. Maybe reach us out on LinkedIn as well. So I just added Twitter handle for all of us here. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we will be happy to answer them. So with that note, I think we can end the session. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.